I have my board all warped. I am ready to start my weaving. I've chosen a few pieces of yarn and I'm ready to weave with them. I have a yarn needle and a piece of yarn, and I'm going to start by putting the yarn on the yarn needle. With the yarn short in my fingers, I'm going to use a pushing motion to push the yarn through the hole in the needle and pull it through on the other side. If I don't get it all, I can keep grabbing. Make sure you get all that yarn through. And then we're not folding this in half. We're just kind of folding over a little tail. So we have some working yarn, but we want just a single thread, not a double. And from here, it doesn't matter where you start, but we're going to do the pattern of over, under, over, under. So I'm going to start over, then I lift up a warp thread and push my needle underneath it. And I can do this across my entire board before I pull through, if that's easier. You could also do it one at a time if you like. So my pattern is over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And now I'm going to take my needle and pull it through. Once my needle is all the way through, I grab the folded yarn and pull that. As I go, I'm just going to keep pulling the yarn until I have about a hand over here. This is where I want to stop. I don't want to pull it all the way through, of course, because that will undo all my work. Now I'm going to take this yarn down at the bottom of the board, and I'm ready to flip over for a pouch. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the board over. And I'm just going to remember what I last did, which I did an over stitch. So I'm going to flip the board over. And now I'm going to go under first. You'll notice that this one has 2 strings. Because neither of these strings are cut, I'm going to count these as 2 separate strings and make sure I'm doing 2 different things. So last thing I did was over. So now I'm going to go under the first string, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And I'm going to pull that yarn all the way through. This time, because I don't have any loose yarn over here, I can pull it tight against the edge of the board. Tuck it down and flip the board over. Get that loose yarn out of my way for now. We'll come back to that at the end of this project. And now I want to look at this side of the board. From now on, it only matters what you see right here, okay? So if the yarn from the previous row is on top, I know this time I need to go underneath first. So that's what I'm going to do. Under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, and pull. So the process is, okay, flip the board, check your line, weave the board, and pull the yarn. And tuck, okay? So you just keep going until you run out of yarn. Check, weave, pull, tuck, flip. Check, weave, pull, tuck, flip. Check, weave, pull, tuck, flip. Now what happens if you forget to change your pattern? If you end up with 2 lines that are the same and when you tuck it, you can still see your warp threads, that is a mistake that you've made. So if you notice that you have 2 lines the same where you forgot to check and change, you'll need to take your needle off your work, grab the yarn at the end of the board, and pull it back through. Before you start weaving again, I would flip it over and make sure you didn't have another row with a mistake. But if this side, you tuck it and you don't see any lines, you're golden. Okay, so you can put your needle back on your yarn, and finish weaving. Now, if your yarn starts getting super fuzzy like this, you have a couple options. You can lick this yarn to bring it back together. You can trim the very end, or you can fold the yarn over and put that folded chunk through the yarn needle. Any of those methods work. And for super fuzzy yarn, you'd be cutting a lot if you end up cutting. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. Now, this actually is short enough that I'm actually ready to tie my next yarn to it. So what do? We are going to get our next piece of yarn. And to tie a knot in yarn, you're going to want to lay the two pieces of yarn together so the ends match. These are the same, they are matching. I'm going to pick up both yarns together like they're little buddies, and I'm going to make a loop-de-loop like they're riding a roller coaster together. Woo! Okay. Now these guys want to get back home from riding the roller coaster, so they need to go through this loop. However, I want to pick up my yarn where it crisscrosses, like with a pinching motion, and I'm going to take this loop and go around the loop and back through. It should maybe look like a little pretzel. Like if you see these crisscross yarns, they look like a little pretzel. Okay, so it's going inside the loop. That's perfect. Now when I pick up my yarn at the tail here and on the long end, I can pull these together and ta-da, there's a knot. So this is what I want in my work. I do not want to cut this yarn super short because that will unravel my knot. I could cut it a little bit shorter if you want to, that's okay. But make sure there's at least like 2 fingers from the knot to the end of the yarn, or your work will unravel, and that would be sad. Now from here, I can take my yarn, put it back on my needle, my new tail with my new color, or more of the same color, whichever you're doing. And then I simply keep weaving. That knot will end up in the middle of the work, and that is a-okay. But our goal here is that we are just keep going with our pattern. So the first little bit of this is going to still be that red, which is fine. And then I flip my board, I check my pattern, and I keep going with every other yarn, and I pull through. And this time that yarn is going to end up somewhere in the middle, and that's just fine. I can leave these tails sticking out, or I could have left them tucked in. It doesn't really matter. Eventually at the end, we will be dealing with those yarns, but not yet. So leave them alone for now and just keep weaving. Same thing, when you have about a hand's worth of yarn left, stop weaving, get another color, tie it on, and then keep going.